There is an area called Blackmire in Enshrouded. You get there quite early, around level 14, 15, and they got really huge, beautiful trees up here, so big that you can build your whole base inside of one of them. But sometimes you don't want your whole base inside of one of the trees. You just kind of want one or a few buildings inside of a tree and might want to do something else with the rest. Sometimes you have already started somewhere else on the map. At least that was the case for me. So this is the place where I have started to build my base already. It's situated above the mountaintop behind the cinder vault where you start the game. And it got the most beautiful view. You can see the whole map from up there. So I've already started to build a few buildings and create a small village. So instead of moving my village to the forest, I decided to move a tree to my base. And that is what this video is about. So this is the place I have planned for the tree. And before we get started, I want to say that this will not be kind of a step-by-step video like my previous build videos, because it's impossible when it comes to making this tree, because it will be a lot of sculpting. So instead it will be kind of general tips and tricks when sculpting in Enshrouded, and some more specific to making a tree. And on that topic, let's start with the first trick when making the tree trunk. That will help you both kind of get a head start building the tree, but also later on when you are going to make your living spaces inside of the tree. One thing I think you will notice quite quickly when you start to build with terrain rather than with building blocks in Enshrouded is that it's actually a lot harder. You have a lot less shapes to work with, but you also don't have any snapping like you got for the normal building blocks. You can't just place them accurately by snapping them together. And it's harder to see how they shape together because they kind of melt together. The terrain melt together rather than having sharp edges like the normal building blocks do. So if you want a certain shapes, it's simply harder to put that together. That means that constructing a round tree trunk, a really high and round tree trunk, and just placing terrain blocks on top of each other is really hard if you don't have something to align them to. So what I did instead was actually to start building a big tree trunk out of normal building blocks. This also helped me get an idea very early on if I had aimed for the correct size compared to the rest of the village without having to invest too much time into actually shaping the tree trunk. Now when you have something to actually align your terrain with, it will be a lot easier to place it accurately in a circle. I decided to actually use the heartwood for the tree because I wanted the tree to be somewhat lighter and, well, brighter in color compared to what you find in Blackmire. But I will use the bark as well later on in the build for some details. You can find the heartwood anywhere inside in the core of those big trees in Blackmire, and the bark of course on the outside of the trees. There's another really big benefit of this approach as well, and that is when you have that base tree trunk to start and base your sculpt off, it will already be hollow, meaning when you are going to start to build dwellings inside of the tree trunk later on, you don't have to start by kind of trying to dig it out without ruining the walls or dig through the walls. It will already be ready. You just have to add kind of details, roofs, stuff like that inside of the tree trunk, which will make that process a lot faster and easier. Now it's time to start with the hard part, to actually sculpt the tree around this tree trunk. And one advice, really good advice I think I can give, is to look at reference pictures. There is absolutely no shame using a ton of reference pictures like whatever art you are making. Professional artists use reference pictures, they help a lot. So if you have a second monitor, if you like trying to, like me, sculpt a tree, if you have a second monitor, put some pictures of trees there. If you don't, maybe print out some pictures of trees and put on the wall, like put them up on the wall behind your computer so you have something to compare with, to draw inspiration from, to see how it actually looks, right? Because of potential copyright issues, the actual reference pictures I was using, mostly of oak trees, are not the ones shown here. These are some AI art that I just made for the video because I know they won't get copyright strike. My next advice is to take a step back quite often when you sculpt. Don't only stay up close. It's a lot easier to see if you're heading in the right direction, if the shapes look good, if you're further away from whatever you're building. Also, don't do too much details at first. Concentrate on getting like the general shapes looking good at distance. Because if you do all those small fine-tuning things at first right away, and you like material mixing, small fine details, everything like that, right? And you end up when you start to close in on like having more stuff built, not liking the general shape of something, you will have wasted so much time on that. So instead, try to make everything look good at distance first. And once it looks good at distance, you can go up close and make it look good up close as well. If you look at trees, either reference pictures of trees or if you have some trees outside you can go and look at, you will notice that the tree trunk is rather even in width up until the first big branches, and then it narrows down substantially, and then it keeps narrowed down for every couple of big branches. So to reflect that, I decided to shave off the top of my tree trunk above the first branches and build a new one a bit narrower to reflect what would actually happen in nature, which meant I had to pretty much repeat the steps I started the tree with putting up scaffolding and then build the tree trunk around that. Something else that is really useful when you sculpt with terrain is to use building blocks to shape the terrain. If you want to shape the terrain using terrain blocks, you can use the single tile terrain block, and it's really good for finer details. But if you are going to remove larger chunks of terrain or create like a large even surface, it's extremely tedious. And if you use the larger terrain blocks, it's really clunky. So what I do instead is I use building blocks, place them a bit inside of the terrain, and then remove them. That way you can make very exact shapes using those building blocks to shape the terrain. I decided to actually not continue the tree upwards, but instead cut the top off and making it rather jagged so it looks like it had been broken off. It means the tree will be somewhat limited in proportions. I don't want it to be too huge, both because of the time investment it requires to make that big of a tree, but also I don't want it to be too dominating in the base. But it also means that in the future, if I want to use kind of broken off tree trunk, it will make sense as some kind of decoration on the ground or part of another building or something like that. So I think that will be a cool concept I can bring to future builds. I also decided to make what looks like a broken off big branch on the side of the tree. It wasn't much going on that side. I didn't have that much branches sticking out on that side. And as well, I thought it could provide for a great spot to just make a hole inside to the inside of the tree once I get to actually create living spaces inside of the tree, so I can have a big window there looking out. At this point I felt it was time to add some greenery to the tree, and I used the foliage tile for that. You can find it pretty much everywhere in Blackmire, even just outside of the Blackmire ancient tower if you go out on the top of the tree branches there. And it's quite easy to put down. I even used the quite large terrain chunks. I wasn't really too careful in placing it. Just putting big chunks on top of the branches that I already put in place. So this is how the tree looks now when I put the greenery there. It really elevates the tree, I think, once you get the greenery in place. And it's actually very fast to put in place once you get... What takes time is the sculpting of the tree trunk, not really putting the greenery there. I guess you can make a lot more with greenery than I did. I wanted it kind of not that dense, because I didn't want it to shadow the sun too much from the rest of the base or overshadow the base. I wanted it rather see-through. And the greenery terrain, of course, since it's not really leaves, it's rather thick terrain blocks, they're not see-through. So if you would put greenery all over the treetop, like a dense tree crown, you wouldn't see through it at all and no sun would shine through, right? So this was my way of solving that. And at this point, I think it's actually time to go over the tree and do all the detailing that I didn't do when I just sculpted the kind of main big shapes. And it is at this point the Blackmire bark comes in, because it's great at creating mossy effects when mixed with the Blackmire heartwood. There is actually moss in the game, but you won't have access to that already at level 14-15 in the Blackmire. It's rather up, very much up north in a high level area, the end game area, or what is the end game area right now at least. But you don't need it, because if you put Blackmire bark in sparse amount and exchange a few blocks on top of the roots, on top of the branches, wherever you want an effect of a bit of rotten moss, it looks very good, I think. So what I did is really, as I went through the tree, fine-tuning all the details and sculpting, changing some stuff I wasn't really happy with. At the same time, I went over the terrain and adding that kind of moss texture mix, or Blackmire bark that is, texture mix, where I felt it added something both to kind of the general look and feel of the tree, as well as where it would in nature be probably moss and a bit of rot, right? Both to the tree roots, on top of the roots, on top of the branches, on top of the tree itself, where the broken off, like big tree trunk was broken off, on top of those places. So that process took quite a long time, but I think it elevated the tree, especially not maybe from far away, but especially when you're up close. As a kind of finishing touch, I decided to add a few fungi or mushrooms sticking out around the tree trunk. I thought it could be fun with some type of way to get up the tree trunk on the outside, even before I actually started to construct living spaces and stairs inside of the tree. The mushroom flesh I use for this can be found up in the Blackmire as well. It's usually on big mushroom things sticking out from the huge trees there, small platforms and stuff like that. So you just mine it and you get mushroom flesh. I also decided to hide grappling anchors inside of the mushrooms and partly inside of the wood as well, to make it easier to quickly go up the tree. I use an old trick where you first delete terrain, then place the item, and then switch back to the building hammer and press undo. It's a very easy way to kind of hide or partly hide items inside of the terrain. So this is the done tree, with an easy way up on the outside, all the detailing done, all the moss textures done, and the next step is of course to create a living space inside, doors, windows, all of that. But that is for my next video, so I will do a video on that. I don't know when it will be out, because I don't have as much time as I used to do. Someone that might have been checking out my previous videos might have noticed that it's like an 8-month gap without any videos on my channel. That's because in my private life, I save this information for last, because some people just click the video and you might not be interested in this information at all. So you got all the interesting stuff, right? Already, how to build a tree. But anyway, I started my own company, and that took a lot of time and effort. I'm at a place now where I'm break even, where I can actually make a living out of like what I do privately, because it's not YouTube that I do to make a living, right? So that took a lot of time. Now it's started to lighten up a little bit. I feel like I'm at a place with my private company that I can actually allow myself to have a bit of hobbies again, not to the extent I used to. So don't expect a video every week, but I will come out with more videos, but it might be 3-4 weeks in between each video. So anyway, next video will be the living spaces inside, all of those things, and it will be a more of a traditional build video, so really step by step, unlike this video that was more like the general idea of how I make the tree. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, maybe subscribe to the channel, even if it's not much videos coming out. If you like the content, even a video a month might be worth subscribing for. Well, that was all. Cheers.